We are fully booked today. The only available room is a suite, and even at a discounted rate, it may not be suitable for you." The manager sized us up from head to toe with a disdainful smile, clearly judging us. It was obvious that he was looking down on us. Just then, an elderly man appeared from behind us. "My name is Jason." Glancing up, I saw my wife, Elizabeth, looking anxious. I wanted to say something comforting, but words failed me at that moment. After much thought, I ended up saying something quite cliché. "Elizabeth, are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. It's not like I'm the one who's sick," she replied. Beside the hospital bed, Elizabeth looked exhausted, as if she was putting on a brave face like a child. Feeling sorry for her, I turned my attention to Charles, who was lying in the bed. We had received news that Charles, my father-in-law, had collapsed just a few hours earlier. It seemed his long-suffered illness had worsened. Neither Elizabeth nor I were aware of my Charles's illness, so the news came as a shock. According to the doctor, no treatment could fully cure him now. He had been informed of his condition and had come to terms with it. So, all we could do was to stand by his side as he underwent treatment in the hospital bed. If only we had a child to cheer him up, I muttered, and Elizabeth silently agreed. We didn't have any children. I was already 40, and Elizabeth was 35, making it feel too late to consider having children now. Even if we were to have a child, it's certain that we wouldn't be able to introduce them to Charles. His condition had deteriorated to that extent. Despite this, seeing my wife in pain made me inevitably wish we had a child. A few months after rushing to Charles's hospital room, he passed away. I managed to accept it because there was nothing we could do against illness, but I wondered about Elizabeth. He was her beloved father, and it wouldn't be easy for her to simply move on. That was my main concern. I took on the responsibility of handling all the arrangements after his death, including paperwork, the wake, the funeral, and notifying financial institutions. However, I left it to his company colleagues to inform others about his death, as he was a well-known consultant in his industry. He was renowned as a consultant in the hospitality industry, though I wasn't fully aware of the extent of his relationships. I wondered if we also needed to inform the media, as he had been featured on TV and in magazines. In the end, I decided to ask for help with these notifications. The most important thing for me was to stay as close to Elizabeth as possible during this time. I wasn't sure if she found my presence comforting, but I remained by her side without saying much. Eventually, the funeral arrangements were completed, and many people began to arrive at the funeral home. The first to show up were my relatives and Elizabeth's relatives, followed by people who lived near Charles. I greeted them and listened to their memories of Charles. Then, a couple who ran a diner nearby appeared. Charles was really helpful to us. He was such a good person. The wife reminisced warmly. It turned out that Charles had given them advice on their diner's service and interior design. A professional, giving advice for free. Isn't this too good to be true? It seemed the diner's couple had thought the same at first. But I think that's one of his good qualities. Because Charles was so passionate about giving advice, they reluctantly made changes to their service and interior as he suggested. To their surprise, the diner immediately started to flourish. This was astounding. As the funeral continued, more attendees arrived. Initially, it was mostly people we knew personally, but gradually, celebrities who had appeared in various media started to show up. Owners of popular diners, managers of famous hotels, and media personnel from different industries paid their respects. What struck me most was how everyone at the funeral spoke highly of Charles. Their businesses thrived immediately after receiving his guidance. Their profits doubled. They were saved by Charles. All attendees, one after another, shared such stories in front of his spirit, paying their respects. It seems he enjoyed helping others more than I thought. Watching the attendees, I gained a renewed respect for Charles. Everyone genuinely praised him, and not a single person had anything bad to say. I was reminded once again what a truly warm person he was. Elizabeth felt the same. She was somber at first, but she gradually began to smile softly. She reminisced about Charles, sharing memories of him. And she began to discover sides of him she never knew. Despite being a funeral, it was a heartwarming moment. By the end of the funeral, it seemed Elizabeth had fully regained her spirits. So, I asked her again, "Are you okay now?" "Yes, I've come to realize just how amazing Dad was. Plus, so many people gave me their contact information," she replied. "That's great. Dad is my pride. I wish I had known about all this sooner." In the end, hundreds of people attended the funeral. Given his media presence, I had expected a large turnout, but the actual number exceeded my expectations. While it was overwhelming, I also felt proud to have such an incredible man as a father-in-law. Though there were unexpected moments, the funeral went smoothly. I was relieved that everything was over without any issues. The biggest gain was that my wife, who had been downcast, now took pride in her father and looked forward. Moreover, she seemed to have made many friends and acquaintances for Charles's funeral. She mentioned people he had helped, giving her their contact information, and now that the funeral was over, she was actually meeting and talking with them. In fact, when I came home from work, she would say things like, "Today, I met the owner of the Chinese restaurant Dad used to take me to," sharing her day's events with a smile. On another day, she happily told me, "I had a phone call with one of Dad's friends," sharing the content of their conversation. Seeing her talk so brightly and happily made me glad too. I had been worried that she might become depressed and withdrawn. But those fears were unfounded, and I was truly relieved. As the first summer after Charles's death went by, and autumn deepened, Elizabeth mentioned something while we were watching TV one weekend. "I've been to this hotel before," she said. The TV was featuring a celebrity introducing a hotel. They were praising its open-air baths and stunning views with typical phrases, and the visuals seemed to match their descriptions. However, one thing caught my attention. "That looks like a very upscale hotel. How come you went there?" "I went there with my dad because of his work," she explained. Once she started talking about her father, she couldn't stop. She started recounting various memories, such as what she liked about the hotel and how, despite being together, Charles was preoccupied with work discussions and hardly paid any attention to her. For a while, I just nodded along, engaging in her stories. When there was a pause in her storytelling, I seized the moment to surprise her with a question. "Hey, our anniversary is coming up. How about we go to that hotel?" "Really? I'd love to," she exclaimed. "Yeah, it's a place full of memories for you, right? It's perfect." Hearing this, she was ecstatic, jumping around like a child, thrilled by my suggestion. Seeing her so happy made me glad I had brought up the courage to suggest we stay at such a luxury hotel. It brought joy to me as well. Meanwhile, she started looking up the hotel on her phone right away. It seemed some aspects, like the interior, had changed, but there were also parts that remained the same. "We might even meet someone who remembers Dad," she speculated. "I'll leave the booking to you then. That way you can talk to the hotel staff and maybe learn more," I suggested. "All right," she agreed, clapping her hands in excitement and diving back into her research. Since the trip was also for our anniversary, I wanted us to take it easy. However, given the season, there would likely be many tourists coming for the fall foliage. We considered going a bit after the peak season to avoid the crowds, but didn't want to stray too far from our anniversary. We wanted a time when it wasn't too crowded yet still close to our special day. That evening was filled with excitement about the trip. We decided to go on a weekday about a month later. Elizabeth had found that weekends and holidays were already fully booked. She was a bit disappointed, but it worked out better for me. "I'll take some time off work for the trip, so don't worry," I assured her. Then came the day of our anniversary trip. Standing in front of the hotel, I was awestruck by its grandeur, far exceeding my expectations. The hotel's lavish exterior was so grand that anyone would agree it deserved its 5-star rating. The clientele coming and going were clearly of a different caliber from us. I felt embarrassed by my casual attire, not having dressed up for the occasion. Yet, Elizabeth, undaunted, casually remarked, "This is amazing, and it really is wonderful," expressing her admiration without hesitation. Soon, she grabbed my hand, somewhat dragging me to the reception, saying, "Come on, let's go in." The hotel's interior was as impressive as its exterior. The lavish decor and the demeanor of the staff raised my expectations even further. If the entrance is this grand, what will the rooms be like? I wondered, my heart racing with anticipation. Contrary to my nervousness, Elizabeth was calm, approaching the reception desk to speak with a staff member. Shortly after, she gestured for me to come over in a panicked manner. Approaching, she exclaimed, "They said we don't have a reservation." "What? How can that be?" I asked, confused by her statement. At the reception, Elizabeth explained that she had made the reservation over the phone and provided her name. The staff member quickly checked but couldn't find her name on the list of reservations. After a double check, still no record of her name was found. Elizabeth confidently asserted, "That can't be right," which seemed to put the staff in a difficult position. Then, she pulled out her phone and showed its screen to the staff. "Look, the call history is right here, isn't it?" Upon seeing this, the staff's complexion visibly changed, and they suddenly started to panic. "Excuse me for a moment," they said, before hastily retreating to the back of the reception counter, only to return shortly after in a fluster. "My apologies, it seems there was a mistake on our part." The staff then began to explain the reason for the missing reservation. "It seems that this hotel handles reservation calls and computer entries separately. In other words, there seems to be a person dedicated to handling calls and another for administrative tasks. Due to the vast number of inquiries and reservations, this system makes it easier for guests to connect with the hotel. Typically, these administrative tasks fall under the manager's responsibilities, but given the manager's lack of computer skills, it seemed that errors in data entry were not uncommon. After collecting discarded reservation slips that had been processed, the staff discovered the reservation slip for Elizabeth's call. It turned out to be a data entry error. As we were discussing this, a young woman in a suit emerged from behind the reception desk. Judging by her attire, she appeared to be the aforementioned manager. She glanced at us and then spoke to the reception staff. "What's going on?" "It appears there was a mix-up on our part, and a guest's reservation was not processed." "Ah, I see. No reservation, that's problematic." Despite her confusion, the manager didn't greet us or introduce herself, which is not what you'd expect from a manager of such a prestigious hotel. Then, she turned to my wife. "I'm sorry, but there are many reservations today and we are fully booked." "But I made a reservation. Isn't this your mistake?" "Unfortunately, we are fully booked today and we don't have any available rooms, well, except for one room." She looked us up and down, smirking, and with a condescending attitude, she said, "The only available room is our most luxurious suite. We can offer it to you at a discount because this was our mistake, but I'm afraid it might still be too expensive for you." Indeed, the suite in this hotel seemed pricey. But if the hotel made a mistake with the reservation, it would only be right to accommodate us in that suite. Yet the manager just smirked. In a low voice, she said things like, I doubt you can afford it, and what will you do now, since you've come all this way? Perhaps you should look for a more affordable hotel." It was truly a speechless moment. I couldn't even retort. To an outsider, Elizabeth and I might look like a couple who had saved up just for this occasion. But for a luxury hotel manager to speak to guests in such a manner was appalling. It was shocking and disappointing, especially since we had high hopes for this hotel. Soon after, Elizabeth whispered to me, "My dad used to say that you can always tell when guests are not accustomed to such places, and treating these new or inexperienced guests well is key to success. It's a shame she doesn't understand that." Is that so? Yes, normally, you'd expect more attentive service in such situations, especially for new guests, but it seems she doesn't get that. Her words carried weight. After all, she is the daughter of a man who once consulted for the hospitality industry. As we spoke, the reception staff seemed to be quietly advising the manager, saying things like, "That's not a nice way to talk to them." But the manager ignored them. She didn't care about the staff's advice. Eventually, the staff gave up and started making a phone call from the counter. From what we could see, the hotel's overall service didn't seem to be the issue. Finally, the manager asked us, "So, what will you do?" As I struggled to respond, Elizabeth sighed and said, "It's a shame. We waited, but you're lacking service. You've lost everything now." The manager frowned at Elizabeth's words, not understanding what she meant, nor attempting to. That's when an older gentleman appeared and approached us. Then turned to the manager and said, "What did you say to these customers?" Well, I didn't mean." The manager became flustered all of a sudden. Sweating and turning pale, he averted his gaze. The elder gentleman then dismissed the manager, saying, "That's enough, you can step back now." Afterward, he apologized to us. "I'm terribly sorry for the oversight on our part." As the elder man was speaking, my wife let out a small "oh." Hearing this, the elder man stared intently at her face. Then, he hesitantly asked her, "Excuse me, but are you by any chance Charles's daughter?" "Yes, you are James, aren't you?" "I'm James. It's been a long time. I was looking forward to meeting you. How have you been?" With a smile, James then apologized to us for the manager's behavior and the reservation error. "Since it was our mistake, and considering you are Charles's daughter and her husband, please feel free to stay for 2 or 3 nights, as you wish." Saying this, the elder gentleman began to inquire with the reception staff which rooms are available. Taking this opportunity, I asked Elizabeth about the elder man's identity. "Who is he?" "James owns this hotel." "Really?" "Yes, I met James when I was little. He was a friend of my father." "Is that so?" "Actually, I only found out that James was the owner when I was researching the hotel. When I called to make the reservation, he happened to answer the phone. We ended up talking about old times besides just the reservation." I was astonished. I was surprised not only that she knew such an influential person, but also that he was willing to offer us an extended stay just because we were related to Charles. I had newfound respect for Charles's greatness. After a short while, James, who had been talking with the reception staff, came back to us. Once again, he deeply apologized. "I'm sorry, but it seems we are fully booked today. However, the suite is available, and since it was designed by Charles, why not stay in the suite?" "Is that all right? I only booked a standard room." "Don't worry about it. It's a special occasion. Let me show you to your room." As we were being led to the suite, I decided to ask Elizabeth about the suite her father had designed. "You mentioned earlier that your father was involved in designing the suite." "Yes, remember I told you about visiting this hotel when I was watching TV. When my father was commissioned to design the suite, I came with him." By the time we finished our conversation, We had arrived at the suite. It was indeed a luxurious suite, just as the manager had mentioned. The interior was top-notch, and the view of the garden through the large glass windows was breathtaking. From the back room, we could walk directly into the well-maintained courtyard. The atmosphere was serene and relaxing. Because I was Charles's son-in-law, we were offered to stay in this room for free. It was James's way of expressing his gratitude to Charles. Initially, Elizabeth was hesitant, but James insisted, saying it was the least he could do since he couldn't attend a funeral. We thoroughly enjoyed our stay. We took a dip in the open-air bath and strolled through the courtyard. We dined at a buffet-style restaurant and cherished our time together. The manager's rude behavior soon faded from our minds. Before we knew it, it was time to check out. As we were packing up and heading to the reception, James was there waiting for us. "I'd like to have a word with you, if you could please come to the drawing room." We were then led to the drawing room. Shortly after, one of the staff brought us tea. Once the staff member had left the drawing room, James began to speak. "I'm truly sorry for what happened. I never imagined that Charles's daughter would be treated in such a manner." "Please, there's no need to apologize," Elizabeth interjected. James slowly turned to us and began to share the situation in bits and pieces. Originally, James's wife was the general manager of the hotel. However, as she aged and it became physically demanding, they decided to pass on the role to a successor. The new manager was the wife of James's son, initially a staff member at the hotel. Transitioning from a staff position to manager apparently inflated her attitude. Gradually becoming more arrogant, she started treating other staff members and eventually the guests with disdain, leading to frequent complaints. Lately, complaints from the staff were increasing, and James was contemplating taking action. This incident particularly affected him, and he was reprimanded by his son as well. The manager seemed subdued, starting from scratch with her managerial training. She's now working behind the scenes, doing the same tasks as new employees and voluntarily cleaning. I felt a bit sorry for her as the son's wife, but hearing that she might be reflecting on her actions was somewhat comforting. Anyways, putting that aside, I truly regret not attending Charles's funeral. It was our busy season. James expressed. "It's okay. I can see how much you remember and care for my father." Elizabeth replied with a smile. She shared that her father and James became acquainted during a period similar to this one, when customer service was being neglected. Despite decreasing patronage, James was the only one concerned about the declining service standards. Upon learning that Charles was a consultant, James immediately sought his advice. From him, James learned the very basics of customer service and passed this knowledge to all staff, which eventually helped regain the hotel's reputation as a luxury establishment. In the end, James apologized to us repeatedly until we left. He also kept saying thank you over and over again. Elizabeth must feel a deep sense of loss for her beloved father's early departure. It's evident from her tears whenever his story is told. But even in his absence, his legacy lives on through those who cherish his principles, spreading his influence far and wide. This brought joy to Elizabeth. A year later, during a visit to Charles's grave, I silently watched Elizabeth. Being with her, I feel such happiness. Perhaps it's because she is your daughter, inheriting your way of life. I reflected on my days with Elizabeth, sharing these thoughts with Charles.